So, because the list was so challenging for us, because we're trying to differentiate between impact on music at large and an actual personal impact to our lives. We decided to kind of come up with our own list of just our personal top 10. The difference being that these are artists who personally impacted us on an emotional level or on a uh, on a taste level as far as kind of shaping our musical taste. So we're gonna dive into that now.
So we had been talking about these top 10 lists for months now. And I have lobbied and argued for Ghetto Boys to make my top 10. If you recall, I used to be into rap,
Yep.
and Ghetto Boys deserve a place, but they fell to honorable mention for me from Houston. So they're not on my top 10 list, but there is another oddball band that I hope a lot of people know well with a crazy name, and that is the Butthole Surfers. In the 1980s and the 1990s, listening to alternative music, they had a huge impact on alternative music, and they were known as kind of oddballs, but they definitely had a unique sound to them. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know when I was listening to them back in the 90s that they were from Texas. But when we started doing our research on all this, I was like, "Oh, man, like, I gotta put the Surfers on the list." So, number 10 on my list is, Butthole Surfers.
They were very influential on me too. They didn't quite make my top 10, but they're definitely an honorable mention. His father, Mr. Peppermint, was also very influential on me growing up. That was a local children's program. And
Oh,
yeah, he had a
Oh,
puppet named
really?
Muffin. You
I
didn't know
didn't
that
know.
was his dad?
No,
Yeah, yeah,
news to me.
yeah. His
That's
dad
fun.
was Mr. Peppermint, had a local kids show with a puppet named Muffin.
Oh yeah, I
And
totally remember that.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's he
connection.
made Gabby Haynes, who made
Wow.
Butthole Surfers. So
Okay. Okay.
and that would always blew my mind when I was like, wow, these are two very different local things. But yeah, they're great. My number 10, and this was just like our kind of co-authored list that we just shared. We couldn't agree on a lot of things. It was really hard and difficult to figure out who makes it, who doesn't. That's why we decided to do personal ones too, just because we could have done 100 list, but so I'll just throw out some more honorable mentions. I mentioned Selena earlier. I think I appreciate Selena more than she was influential on me, but I recognize what she meant to Texas, and she was definitely a superstar. I think more than just in Texas, but definitely here in Texas. Kelly Clarkson definitely has a career and a track record that you could say she should probably be an honorable mention. I like some of her stuff. I don't know that I know all of it, and she actually, speaking of people who can cover songs and usually do better than the original, she is chef's kiss with some of that stuff. Roy Orbison on our joint top 10 list, but just made honorable mention on mine. That was a really hard one for me to decide on. And then I'm going to throw Post Malone out there just because I don't know that we've seen enough to know where he's going to end up, but I'm going to keep watching his career with interest.
Mhm.
So all that to say, my number 10, and he did make the cut after a lot of thinking, is Spoon. In when I got turned on to Spoon, was definitely coming out of, grunge. Rock was hard to find anywhere. It was pop was reigning supreme everywhere you looked, but MySpace and the internet and Napster and all that started to take over. And in indie music in general, but especially indie, alternative indie rock is when really you couldn't find them easily, but unless you were, just online with people that had similar interests. And to me, I started feeling like they were part of that indie rock movement of the early 2000s. And I know they predate that as a band, but that's when I really got into them. And yeah, just really got me into checking out a lot of indie rock that I was like, it's a genre, but it's really just, people making the music they want to make and not worrying
Yeah.
about labels and marketing and all that and just letting the people decide. And it opened my musical ears to a lot of things, and they were definitely one of those bands. And they being from Texas, I felt I needed to put them on the list here. So, Graham, any honorable mentions that you want to throw out there before you get to your number 10?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everyone. So there's only one crossover from our most impactful list to my personal list. But all the people, obviously, we already talked about on our most impactful list. They're honorable mentions, for me. I mean, they all impacted me in some way or another. But for me, my top 10 is it's just very personal. I know, I mean, that's what it is. It's my personal top 10. But I mean, it's to me like what is the best and the greatest and the most profound or most impactful is not always to me what personally resonates with me. And so, I just things for me are just a little more emotional, I guess. I don't know. And like what connects with me emotionally, that's what's on my list. And so, but funny enough, my number 10 spot is also Spoon.
So we did not collaborate on any of these. This is the first time we're
Yeah, we didn't share
these.
this.
So that's funny. That's great.
But Spoon to me, like I didn't get into them until more recently, like the last 2 or 3 years. But man, they're so good. Like they're just really, really talented and just craft really great, memorable songs. And I saw them live for the first time. It was last year, maybe a year and a half ago at Tannehill's, and it was just fantastic. Like it was such a great show, and they're just so tight and so good at what they do. And their most recent album to me is one of their best, and it won a Grammy, Lucifer on Sofa. And it's just from top to bottom, just amazing. Like it's just every song is great. So yeah, for me, Spoon is number 10. I won't get, go on too much about them since Corey already talked about them quite a bit, but yeah, they're fantastic. And, they're probably rising up my list, but right now, just cause they're kind of a newer band to me, discovering them only a few years ago, that's why they landed at the 10th spot.
Well, number 9 for me is going to be a new one that we haven't mentioned. I haven't heard anybody talk about them, but they come out of Arlington. They originally started out as a glam metal band, morphed into a heavy metal band. When you start looking at best drummers, best guitar players of all time, Vinnie Paul and Dimebag Darrell from the band Pantera, are mentioned on pretty much every single one of those lists. And if you don't know the story of how Dimebag Darrell died, it's extremely sad. It was terrible. He was actually, shot on stage along with like 2 or 3 other people, I think up in Ohio. And, that made a huge impact on them, obviously losing him in the band. And then Vinny died not too long ago, actually, I think like 2017 or 2018. So, the band is a shell of itself from the original days, but they just had a huge impact. And when Darrell died, I wish I would have stars like he had show up for his funeral. I mean, he had some big names, Van Halen, Kiss. They were all very enamored with his playing and his style of play. So when you look at what Pantera did for metal, to me, they just made a massive impact on that genre and coming in number 9 for me.
Yeah. And just Vinny, that happening in front of Vinny, seeing that happen to his brother, that's tragic too in its own right. But for him to go on and have, another career with another band after that, but then for him to lose him earlier than, we expected. And the rockers that came out for his funeral. And I've heard a story that Dave Grohl was grilling, like burgers and dogs and feeding people at the wake or, the get together after his funeral. So that says a lot about those guys. They did not make my personal list, but I am definitely understand that they are in the conversation. I'm a huge Dallas Stars fan, and they wrote the song for that. There is great stories about the Stanley Cup partying with Pantera and getting dented and all kinds of stuff back when the Stars won the cup. So they are legendary in Texas, but especially in this area, DFW. My number 9, I think I lobbied for him almost as hard as Beyonce. Didn't get that win. I took the wins I could get, but on our joint list. But my number 9 is Don Henley. I think I'm the biggest Don Henley fan in our group, and I'm fine. I'll own it. I am a big Eagles fan, but I also like his solo things as well. So he did make the cut, but I will say that it's hard to decide who's not going to and who will. But just I've seen the Eagles live. Unfortunately, it was more recent, so it was after Glenn Frey had passed. But I mean, that when you talk about drummers that can sing lead on the song they're drumming for, there's a very small list of people there, and they're all pretty legendary names. And he's on that list, but he also can come out and play guitar, and he can also solo, just do his own solo work and inspire. The musicians that I was into, they're covering Don Henley songs, and I'm like, this just kind of, I think that confirms it for me. A lot of the people that it resonates with me that, okay, there's a reason why they belong on my list. They're clearly on other, musicians that I admire's list. But so that is my number 9, Don Henley. Graham?
Yeah, for number 9 for me, this is someone that originally, when we started coming up with the most impactful list, the top 10 that we discussed earlier, I had him on the list and lobbied for him just because he's someone who was definitely a game changer for me as far as discovering him and his music, and just his ability technically on a guitar to just shred and just create a very unique guitar sound, where he would take songs, that were very well known and do his own versions, his own interpretations of them, but they were wildly different and unique. And he was just able to make them his own. And we're talking about songs, legendary songs and artists like Jimi Hendrix, that he would take these songs and create his own versions that were just amazing. Like you were just floored by them, even though you knew the originals were fantastic on their own, but he just took them to a whole nother level. And this is Stevie Ray Vaughan. Just mind blowing what the man could do on a guitar. And another guy who, left us too soon. And, we would have really liked to see where he could have gone if he had stayed with us, for many more years. But yeah, just, discovering like his live performances at Austin City Limits and just watching videos of those and just being just mind blown what the man could do with a guitar. Just incredible. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what else there is to say other than just the guy was a wizard on the guitar, and just blew my mind and opened up that world to, the more bluesy kind of, guitar style for me. And yeah, he's just incredible.
Yeah, he's on my list here. I actually bumped him up a couple spots on my personal list, but number 8 for me, when we go through these lists, it's always, tough to decide. Some people are born here and then leave when they're a child, or they were born elsewhere. I think Leadbelly was
Right.
born in Louisiana and then came here young as a child. So this one, it's one of those situations where he was born in Denton, just up the road from where we all sit, and left at a young age to go to California. But he is originally from Texas, so then he qualifies for my list. And he fronted Sly and the Family Stone, so that's going to be Sly Stone. And I really look at the genre and the impact that somebody has on the type of music that they play. Well, Sly actually had an impact not only in his genre of R&B, but he really was one of the first people to come up with that funk sound. And he also experimented with, a lot of rock as well. So another guy, and we talked about Willie and his fondness for drugs. Sly liked drugs a little bit more and different types of drugs than Willie did. So he really did a lot of experimentation with psychedelic music. And, you look back and you look at like Prince's career, or you look at like Rick James' career, they wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Sly Stone. and Sly and the Family Stone. And when you listen to some of that rap from the 80s, you hear Sly and the Family Stone's music sampled in Beastie Boys music, in Public Enemy music. LL Cool J, I think, sampled him in Mama Said Knock You Out. So, his music has just spanned generations and continues to be used even in, sampled in new music today.
Yeah, he is honorable mention for our group list and personal list too. Yeah, you nailed it right on the head there. I'll say I keep forgetting some honorable mentions I had jotted down, but for me, Leadbelly and Blind Lemon Jefferson almost go in together on our group list. We decided to just do one and not the other. I think some of my picks are because, it was like adjacent to one of our other artists we already had on there. So we kind of honorable mentioned or put them on our personal list, but honorable mentioned, especially for what he and Leadbelly mean to Deep Ellum and DFW, like having the music scene, or Dallas specifically having the music scene in Deep Ellum, is those two guys. We could, like I said, do a whole nother segment on those two guys in Deep Ellum, and probably will in the future, but I just wanted to throw him out there because we've talked about Leadbelly a few times. But back to my list, my number 8 is adjacent to Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings. John, you mentioned him earlier, being part of the Highwaymen. And you mentioned he was played with Buddy Holly too. And the legend goes, he gave up his seat on that flight to, I can't remember who, but to another person. And we could have lost him way too soon before we knew Waylon Jennings as Waylon Jennings. We did lose him, but not until we got some really great stuff from him. So just growing up, like I said, my family, we listened to a lot of country music, a lot of Texas music, and Waylon Jennings was definitely in that mix. Willie Nelson is now the only living member of the Highwaymen, with Waylon, Jacob Furr, and Kristofferson now onto the other plane. But yeah, he is a legend, even if he just wrote the Dukes of Hazzard theme song. And what that show meant to me as a kid, I might have put him on a list just for that, but it is so much more than that, obviously. But just a fun fact that is and he narrated it too, I believe. I think he was the narrator on that show, if I'm remembering.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, just talking about the influences where it just started to branch out from just their music, and they were, you'd find them in TV and movies and all of it. It was, that outlaw country. It was a very, very, very popular. I don't think I realized till I was older how popular these guys were outside of just Texas, but outlaw country was huge across the country. But that is my number 8.
Yes, that's a good one. Definitely someone we talked about for the main list as well. And I mean, he's a giant. He's a giant for sure, and definitely is an honorable mention for me as well. My number 8 is a band that I discovered, I guess it was on their second album that I really discovered them, but they were a local band out of Denton, and I've seen them live a number of times, and they just really, really kind of changed they were just so different from, I guess, a lot of the stuff that I was listening to at the time. Kind of changed my musical taste quite a bit once I got into them. And they're a band called Midlake. Yeah, I don't know, how well known they are. I mean, they've had some commercial success. They're on a European record label, or at least they were. I don't know if they're still on Bella Union, but a lot of the bands that, impacted me were bands that I would see live, and a lot of the bands that I would see live were local bands, and, Midlake, made good and was kind of had some national success, definitely overseas more so than in the States. But I'm trying to think of the guy.
Jason Lee.
Yes. Jason Lee is a big fan of Midlake, the actor Jason Lee. And he has a home in Denton, and his buddies with those guys. But I think that got them kind of some more national pub too. And Jason Lee got behind the band. They actually have several business ventures together, Jason Lee and one of the guys from the band. But yeah, I loved going to see those guys play live, and they just had such a unique sound that really resonated with me. Yeah, and then I got to see him open up for Pearl Jam. When I saw Pearl Jam for the first time at the American Airlines, they were the opening act, which was, for me, it was really cool, to see them, make it to that biggest stage, and be there in American Airlines Center opening up for Pearl Jam was fun.
I'm going to keep it rolling a little faster here because I have a lot of overlap starting with number 7. So, number 7 on my list is Stevie Ray Vaughan. I think we've already kind of talked about what kind of an amazing guitarist he was, and life cut short way too soon. But me personally, I love blues music, listening to his music for, decades now. He's just had a huge impact on me personally. Um, and I've got his entire catalog, although it wasn't that extensive. Just one of my favorite musicians.
Mine number 7 is the first of local bias coming into play. I've got about 4 on here that are definitely local or just very personal bias, which is why we came up with these and why we said we were going to do personal ones. But I had wanted to see this individual play in Fort Worth when he was coming up, and just never, the first time I saw him was on Saturday Night Live. And when I watched him then, I said, I think I missed my window to see this guy in a small venue or in Fort Worth. I think he still likes to do like the secret pop-up shows, and, it could still happen. But 2 days ago, I got to finally see him live. And it was I'm kind of glad it was my first time to see him live. It was a very special show for him, and I think for our city, Fort Worth. And it was everything in my power not to just move him up the list right after that. I was like, nope, I'll just, try to cool off from this high of coming off this show. But Mr. Leon Bridges, newer, in the last 10 years or so to music, or at least to being well known in music. But got his start in Fort Worth, playing a lot of the places that we've been to or we drive by all the time, and working at Del Frisco's. And he was a part of this city, and he was making music that is very unique and very him, but also you get Texas, you get Fort Worth, specifically DFW, from his music. And a couple nights ago, just to see that show, and sold out Dickies Arena, all the different kinds of people that were there, everyone having a great time, a good time, not a single bad vibe or negative energy in the house. Everyone got along. Everyone was so nice to each other, and like, oh, let me help you. Just you're seeing strangers get along better than I've ever seen at a concert. Part of that, I think it is Fort Worth, but also I think it's just his music and his fan base, and lots of good vibes off this dude. And that's why he came in my top 10. And
yeah, I'm really glad. I'm really glad you have him on your list. I don't have him on my list. I think only because, just longevity. Like, he's fairly new, to all of us. But I mean, yeah, everything you said, I would second. Like, that show, I was there with Koi as well. Unfortunately, John wasn't there. I wish he could have been there. Next time, you have to go see him. It was fantastic, and yeah, just really special. Just him coming home, like you said, and selling out Dickies Arena, and all the things about you were talking about, as far as the vibe and everything. Like, I had all those same thoughts as you. Just like, he brings people together, and it was just fantastic. It was such a good scene. The music was fantastic. Maddie Parker coming out on stage and giving him a plaque and declaring it, November 15th is Leon Bridges Day. It was just, like, I had to hold back tears. It was so emotional. Like, it was just very, very cool. So yeah, Leon, he's awesome. I got to actually see him before he did blow up. He played a little show with another local guy that I know, Jake Palachek. They played at Fred's Burgers, little tiny,
wow,
little venue. And my brother, he knows lots of people in the local music scene, having come up in it. He was in the din band, which actually I'll get to later, but he had met him before. He knew him, through mutual friends. And I actually got to meet him and shake his hand there at the burger place, Fred's, when he played that show. And I knew when I saw him, I was like, this guy is destined for greatness. He just had such an amazing voice. The songwriting ability that he has, that kind of retro style that he brings back, into a modern kind of setting. Just fantastic. So really glad he's on your list. Number 7 for me, though, is a band that is the only, I think, on, well, I don't know about the rest of y'all's list, but probably, I'm guessing, the only instrumental band on any of these lists tonight. And that is a band from Austin, Texas called Explosions in the Sky. Huge influential for me, just that post-rock sound. One of the really first fully instrumental bands that I really was sold out on and buy all their albums and go see them play live. And they were just incredible. And then they're still good and they're still making music to this day. Actually, their most recent album I checked out a few weeks ago and it's really, really good. And, they're one of those bands that even though you may not know their name, you've probably heard their music because they've been in so many movies and commercials and things like this because they set such a good, their music, the instrumental style, their music is just so good for setting a mood or a vibe, in a particular setting. And just really, really good. Seen them live multiple times at Stubbs. I've seen them at Stubbs down in Austin, seen them here play Wall Sound Festival, and just was always blown away by their performance. Just very, very tight, very good band. And to me, they had a huge impact on me.
This is where your local experience, the two of you, is going to really shine because I haven't seen a lot of these bands that are from Texas or local or even had the opportunity to see them. So
have you seen Friday Night Lights? Or
yes, yeah.
They did the soundtrack for that.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Well, no, it's great because I'm learning about some artists that I need to go explore and check out. So it's great. But the remainder of my list, I would say there's a lot of overlap. I just have to call out the only two things in life that make it worth living is guitars that tune good. And so Waylon Jennings is my number 6 and been listening to him since I was a kid. That was one of the artists that my dad used to listen to. And Lukenbach, Texas, I mentioned in a previous episode, one of my favorite songs of all time, guys. I absolutely love that song. And a little known fact, Waylon Jennings wrote a song about me, the song Lonesome, Ornery, and Mean. It's actually written about me.
Awesome. All right. My number 6, I think we're on, right, is overlap from our list. I guess I'll call it, or the official list we came up with. But this is more personal list, and was very personal growing up in all the country that we listened to and that I digested from my dad. And it's King George Strait, and The Fireman. I remember loving that song as a kid. I could not get enough of that song. My parents thought it was hilarious. I just always wanted to hear that song, always sing it. There's a few artists I think of when I think of my dad and just, the times that we'd be driving around in his truck and listening to the radio, and it's Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, George Strait are definitely the first ones that come to my mind. That's why they're on my list. I enjoy them personally, but I definitely have genetic disposition and just really, fond memories of that time of my life and my dad. And so, yeah, he was a no-brainer for me to put him on my list so that's I think my first overlap of the main list, but I have a few more.
Gotcha. Very well. So for me, number 6 is the first country artist, I guess, to check in on my personal list. And it is not an overlap. And I debated putting them on the list, mostly because, I was a little self-conscious, I think, about this choice. But the reason they're on the list is because growing up, country was not in my wheelhouse. It just wasn't. My parents weren't country music fans, despite being native Texans. They weren't into that. So country, to me, didn't come into my world till my probably teenage years. And one of the bands that kind of crossed over for me and brought me over into that, country sound was the Dixie Chicks. And they check in at number 6 for me. Or the Chicks, I guess, as they're known today. But for me, they were the Dixie Chicks. Yeah. But yeah, currently known as the Chicks. But yeah, I mean, when I started hearing their stuff on the radio, I was like, this is good. Like this to me, like it appeals to me. It's just great, melodies, great harmonies. They just had a style that was very much their own to me. That didn't sound like everything else. Just had a uniqueness to it, and that just kind of opened up for me the country, music world, which led into other things for me after that. The Willie Nelsons, just kind of going back and getting into, Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings and all that stuff. And even then getting into like alternative country too. I think they were kind of a gateway to that as well for me. So that's why they're number 6 on my list.
Yeah.
Natalie Maines is one of the most unique female voices out there. so
Absolutely. Absolutely. She's great.
fantastic. And Earl Had to Die.
Mm-hmm. It's a hilarious song.
Yeah.
Honorable mention for me with them.
Yeah.
And they're Fort Worth, so local
Mhm.
bias there too, but they definitely have more than just a local impact. They're huge.
For sure. For sure. Well, number 5, another band that we've mentioned, but guys, I'm not going to accuse you guys of this, but I have been known to call people that don't put ZZ Top on a top 10 list communists. I'm just saying, not being accusatory here, but ZZ Top is, it's my number. They're my number 5. Like when you hear the song LaGrange, which is about a very small Texas town and a brothel back in the day, just the groove on that track, man, it gets you moving. Like it's one of my favorites to kind of bang your head to a little bit. And then, also mentioned in a previous episode about being an MTV kid. They were one of the first bands to really embrace the music video.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a car guy, but damn was that car cool in all those videos that they used to have. And of course they used to have, the pretty women that were in the videos.
Yeah, I was going to say like Legs sticks out.
Yeah.
Well, and the
Sleeping Legs, Sleeping Bag, like that album Eliminator, just it came out during the MTV craze, and it got a lot of exposure, and so that was really my first taste of ZZ Top. It was that album, and then going back and listening to Rio Grande Mud and their first couple of albums, they're just fantastic, and they've continued to pump out music, even though unfortunately, the bassist passed away a few years ago. They continue to tour and make music, but yeah, they just had a huge impact on me, guys, when I was growing up as a kid.
honorable mention for me, didn't make the top 10. Sorry, I'll turn in my capitalist card, I guess. I don't know. Like, do I even have one of those? But have you seen them live, John?
I have not.
Well, I have.
Although,
So I'll scoreboard you on that.
I do have an interesting story where I missed. I forget his name now. Is it Dusty
Rhodes.
No,
Dustin Rhodes.
Dustin Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes is the wrestler.
Am I getting wrestlers?
Yeah, I'm spacing on his name right now, but I actually missed him at a bar one night.
Dusty Hill.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Dusty Hill, Billy Gibbons.
Billy Gibbons. Billy Gibbons is the one. So I missed Billy Gibbons by an hour at a bar in Seattle one day. Like I left and he showed up like 45 minutes later. And like it was in the news, they had pictures at the bar, and I was like, shoot, I could have seen Billy Gibbons.
Yeah. I saw them live, and they're still great. And this was before Dusty passed away, but yeah, their names are, I should have remembered the name. I always remember the guy without the beard is named Beard, Frank Beard.
Frank Beard,
yeah. But so that's what I think of when I think of those music videos. The beards, the fuzzy, like furry guitars.
Yes.
They could spin them because they had some type of like spinner on these guitars. I mean, it was showmanship like nobody else. I completely understand why they'd make anybody's top 10 list. Honorable mention for me, I just couldn't quite fit them in with some of these bands that honestly, I'm going to put ahead of Don Henley that have no business being in front of Don Henley. It's just because it's personal. So some personal bias coming into play for sure. You can send hate mail to John and just, put my name in the subject line. It's fine. He'll get it over to me. But so my number 5 definitely local bias, definitely personal bias. And they're not as new as Leon Bridges, but newer. But the old 97s, I got into them kind of that same time frame I was getting into Spoon, but they're from Dallas, so it's a lot easier to catch them playing. And another band that you're just when you see them go from your city to being featured in, Jennifer Aniston, Vince Vaughn movies, like, Breakup, I think it was called, or something like that. I can't remember what movie that is, but they go to a old 97's concert in New York or wherever that movie was based. And it's just like, okay, like these local guys made good, but I have a lot of great memories of going to their show. It's a very high energy concert. And so some of the ones on my list are going to be ones that's just like, I got to see them a lot live because of proximity. And so they're just going to mean a lot more to me, but yeah, just love their style and their music. It's something that I think is uniquely Texas, uniquely this area. It doesn't sound a whole lot like other things, but they're just a fun, good time. And you hear them covered a lot when you just hear the people that go play a patio at a bar or something. You'll usually hear an old 97 song being covered. But yeah, Graham, who do you got?
Yeah, for me, I'm really glad old 97's made your list. Again, like there's so many bands that could be on my personal list. Old 97's, I didn't like list out honorable mentions, but I would say they're definitely one as well. Just as I got into that whole alt country thing back in the day and them being a local, version of that, I was definitely very into it. Number 5 for me is the only one from our most impactful list, and that is Willie. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on him because we already have, but just he's the king. Just again, like the Dixie Chicks kind of being my gateway. I mean, I'd heard Willie Nelson obviously before Dixie Chicks, just growing up, but just country was never my thing. But like once I kind of got into that country sound and then just going back and just diving into his catalog and he's still, like John said, just putting out stuff to this day that just quality work. Yeah. Everything he puts out is worth listening to. And yeah, he's the greatest. So he's number 5 on my list.
Great choice. So number 4, all of these are overlap from, other artists that we've already kind of mentioned. Is number 4 on my list is Buddy Holly. Like that was another artist that my dad listened to quite a bit growing up. I think we had some of his old 45s when I was a kid, or maybe some cassette tapes from him. And, one of my fondest memories about Buddy Holly music, here I am tying it back to the vinyl again, but it's a local story. So there was a record store called Bill's Records. And when I was relocating to Texas, I didn't know a lot of people here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so Bill would stay at his shop literally all night. Like I think he lived in his store. And I could go over there after I was done working and literally go from like 6:30 till midnight just sitting in there talking to Bill when I first moved there. And I started moving some boxes in Bill's Records, and I found an original Buddy Holly album from like the 1950s. And it was a little beat up, but Bill was like, damn, good find. And I think he wound up charging me like $15-20 for the record. So it wasn't that bad. And I still got it in my collection and it plays fantastic. And so it's one of my fondest memories, not only of Buddy Holly because of the album, but also of Bill, and who we unfortunately lost a few years ago as well.
Yeah, we've entered with the old 97s being my last one here. We've entered a run of 3 bands that are on here because of personal bias and because of those personal connections like you're talking about with local people in the music scene, whether it's, Bill or an artist. And what Leon Bridges in the last 10 years has meant to me in local music in this city, and what, Spoon and old 97s the decades before that, when I was really coming into my own and figuring out the music I liked that wasn't just the music that my parents liked. In fact, I mean, my mom did like this band, but it was not something they were ever going to introduce me to. That's for sure. It was more like I'm going to start introducing them to some music. And then from a personal standpoint, just that, the lead singer of this band, one of the lead singers, does most of the lead singing, and bass player Todd Pipes being my high school English teacher when I was in 9th grade. So just, he was one of my favorite teachers before I even knew he was in a band. And just him being in a band that ended up going on to pretty big things and pretty great things. The band is Deep Blue Something, but just I do have personal connection to this band too. That's why they're on my list. That's why they're so high on my list. But you would know them from as a one-hit wonder, with Breakfast at Tiffany's being the biggest song that they ever had, and almost everyone I've ever talked to, whether they're from Texas or not, knows that song. And it's on every 90s playlist and one-hit wonder playlist and all kinds of things. But they have multiple great albums, in my opinion, and they're about to come out with another one next year in April, I believe. So I'm looking forward to that. But the things that they've also just done and put back into the local scene, his brother Toby and Todd, they have produced local music and local bands, and they've, really they take people under their wing. They do what I saw him do for all of his students when he was teaching. They're great human beings, great people, very proud that they're part of the local music scene and a part of my musical upbringing and things that influenced me when I was in my most formative years for music and really, everything in life. So Deep Blue Something coming in at number 4 on my list, which again, way above Don Henley. So, it's personal, it's
Yep.
biased.
Nothing wrong with that. I love it. I actually love it. And I will mention too, like, he's been in some other bands, Little Black Dress.
Mhm.
They have some great stuff too. I really enjoy some of their songs.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're great. And the new song that we just listened to, it's good. It's very good.
Yeah.
I'm very excited for the album.
For sure.
My number 4 is also pretty much the rest of mine, all the way up to the top, are pretty personal, I would say. Well, number 1, maybe not so much personal, but will be one that probably a lot of people don't know. But number 4 is a band that my older brother, who's 5 years older than me, played bass in. They only put out one album. It was a double album released in the year 2000. They were a band from Denton called Lift to Experience. And they're on my list. Would they be on my list if my brother wasn't in the band? Probably not. Probably I wouldn't have. I don't know if I would have discovered them if my brother was not in the band. I feel like being in Dallas-Fort Worth, I probably would have, just because I was into the local music scene, so it probably would have. But I will say that, like, my brother being in the band is definitely not the only reason they're on the list. Like, they literally did. Like, when I first listened to them, I first listened to their first EP, I was like, I don't know if I like this. Like, it was very experimental, very different. I don't know if I'm into it or not, but like the more and more I listened to it, and then when they released their full length double album, and then I got to see them live multiple times, obviously, they just changed. They changed for me what, just broadened my horizons musically, I guess you would say, like to things that I wasn't into before, and just sounds and yeah, just that whole kind of like post rock kind of sound like that wasn't a real big thing for me until I got into Lift to Experience, and then started discovering a lot of the Explosions in the Sky came after Explosions in the Sky, who would cite Lift to Experience as one of their biggest influences. They were very influenced by my band and my brother's band, and they went on to some pretty big success, mostly overseas. They were also on Bella Union, same record label that Midlake was on. Although Midlake was signed after, they came after Lift to Experience. Lift to Experience was the first band out of Denton that Bella Union signed, and then they signed us and multiple other ones out of Denton. But Bella Union is a European record label. I don't know if you're familiar with Cocteau Twins.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Cocteau Twins. Simon from Cocteau Twins is one of the owners of Bella Union, the record label, and which was Cocteau Twins was a band that my brother was into, like in his coming up into music, and so it was really cool for him to be signed to Simon's record label. But they toured multiple times all over Europe. They toured the U.S., did a big U.S. tour once. Yeah, but again, just to me, like they really did open me up to a whole lot of other music that I don't think I would have gotten into had they not kind of been that gateway for me.
I really feel like I am being left out, that I haven't listened to local music. Like local bands. So I want everybody listening to know that I have seen Polyphonic Spree. I've listened to a band called Fair to Midland, which is from Texas. And I knew Tripping Daisy before I moved to Texas.
And
So-
Toadies.
and the Toadies, yes. We'll get into that in another episode. But yeah, no, I feel like I missed out on all these like good local bands, guys. Like I actually was just like looking up your brother's band to see if I could get a hold of that album. It'd be really cool to kind of find that and just kind of listen to it. So, but yeah, I missed out on like a lot of these bands not living in the area. So, well, my number 3 is a blues artist that we've already talked about ad nauseum, Leadbelly. And, Leadbelly didn't originate here, like we said earlier, but really considered Texas his home. Bet you didn't know that he was considered a virtuoso on the 12-string guitar, or maybe you did know that. But he was a multi-instrumentalist and played, I think, violin, harmonica, guitar, and I think he was, he's just really into blues music and gospel music back in the day and got on my personal radar a long time ago. I've been picking up Leadbelly albums. Anytime I see one, I pick it up. If I find it in a thrift store, I'll snag it. So yeah, just, influential to me. And it's one of my favorite types of music to listen to and, chill to and learn from. I think there's a lot of good history and stories in that music. So.
Yes, definitely deserves to be on anybody's, probably should be on mine. He's honorable mention for me, along with Blind Lemon Jefferson. But yeah, I think you give a good non-biased perspective on Texas music.
Yes.
But it's still personal for you. But because like I said, I'm coming up on my last of the local bias, personal bias type stuff. But even before Deep Blue Something, this local band was very influential on me from the first time that my friend gave me a tape he had recorded of their tape that they were selling at shows that his older brother had got. And their tape was, very DIY. But the songs on that, a lot of those songs did end up on their first full album release, Rubberneck, that went on to everyone in the country knowing about these guys, and that is the Toadies. And yeah, I was, starting out on guitar at the time that they kind of collided with my ears. And I just, between them and Weezer and Smashing Pumpkins, I wanted to try to, play like these types of songs, make that type of music in the early 90s. Yeah, I've seen them live quite a bit too, so that there's a lot of that bias going on here. But right there, along with Deeply Something, who came a little bit later into my teenage years than the Toadies did, but they, like Deeply Something just was they like The Cure and the Smiths, and so do I. Kind of resonate with them. But for me, Toadies was like nothing I had wrapped my head around before. I mean, there was grunge and things like that out of Seattle that I had heard, but this had a Texas growl to it, and and being a Fort Worth band, and then just watch their career and their trajectory. And then they're still doing it today, playing shows all over, but we can always still catch them locally here for sure. And yeah, they come in at my number 3 as a result of just kind of the personal impact that they've had on me as a music listener and a someone who dabbles in trying to make music.
One day we'll have to do an episode about the Toadies and how we kind of came together.
Yeah.
As a unit, and do a song analysis on Possum Kingdom.
Yeah. I mean, our conversation on Possum Kingdom was probably the real episode 0 of our podcast, where we weren't recording, but that was the first of many, colorful conversations about music. I was obviously a little more attached to that band than you, John, when we were talking about them.
Yeah. Sorry, Ram, good.
And that was On the Way and coming back from a Pixies concert.
Yes.
But Pixies, obviously, I mean, maybe everyone does know, but probably hugely impactful, influential on the Toadies.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that, especially with me and Coy, that there's crossover on this personal list. I am surprised that we have 2 in the exact same spot, which is Spoon at number 10, and then Toadies is number 3 for me as well. and not going to spend a lot of time on him just because Coy already has. But yeah, it's just one of those bands that just changed the game for me as far as what I was into and what kind of music I liked, and it was just something totally different out of nowhere that, just sounded very different. And talked about it already in episode 1. Me and my buddy wore out the CD and just seeing them live, multiple times, Rec Room, places like that back in the day. And just, it was just so cool to me as a Fort Worth kid, seeing a band from Fort Worth just make it to that larger stage, and was just so proud of them. And yeah, and they're just great. Yeah.
All right, we're down to the top 2 now. And number 2 on my list is a guy that we've mentioned in just about every damn episode we've had so far, Kristofferson. And I think there's only one other person that we've talked about that could probably outdo his career from a songwriting perspective and an impact to rock music, to country music. Kristofferson just was involved in so many different things and was so unique in his songwriting. And Coy, we were chatting about you're going back through his catalog and listening to it deeply right now. Pretty amazing guy, just in terms of being a lyricist. And I know for me, the Silver Tongue Devil and I is one of my favorites, and Jesus Was a Capricorn. Like, just great albums. But yeah, he's my number 2.
Nice. Man, I struggled with whether to put him on in my top 10 or not, and I cited on honorable mention for him, but I still, feel sick in my stomach that he's not in my top 10, just because, yeah, I think when we first were talking about this, I was like, I've always appreciated him. I've always had great reverence for him. When we first started doing these top 10 lists, he was still with us, and since he passed, we've just talked about him so much that it's probably just a bias where I wanted to put people we hadn't already talked about a lot, and maybe like people hadn't even heard of some of the people on my top 10 list. So that's probably the only reason he's an honorable mention, is that we've already honored him so much in our main list, in our first episode. That's why I'm glad we're saying there's no right or wrong answers, because it's absolutely wrong that I didn't put him in the list, but I did it intentionally. I did that a lot. It's a very biased list. It was the only way I could really do this list without just kind of rehashing what we had already done as a group, just to try to get some more names out there that I feel like we should be talking about. But that being said, I have only overlap from here on with the last 2 that I have, and they're in the same positions, I believe, that they're on our main list. So my number 2 is Buddy Holly, for all the reasons we've already talked about there. And Peggy Sue, all those songs I heard coming out of that jukebox, and I feel like that's the right way to first hear Buddy Holly, maybe. I mean, your vinyl probably is right up there too, that you found. Nice score, by the way, and I need to come check that out. I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah.
But for me, it was the old school jukebox that played the 45s. You punch your number, you see the record arm come out and put it in, and so that was every Friday growing up, we'd try to go to this one pizza place in Lake Worth, and it had a very 50s diner type feel to it. It had great pizza, it had an arcade, which was a big part of my growing up too, and a jukebox that I could put all these songs that I knew my dad liked, to listen to also, and my mom, and nothing from past the 60s on that jukebox, but a lot of it was 50s or earlier. And so yeah, he was always, I couldn't wait to put on any of his songs, multiple of his songs, and just play a few arcade games, eat some pizza. And that was a Friday, every Friday for a long time. It's just like, that was something to look forward to. And as those songs have stuck with me, I have, the older I got, I came back around to appreciating him and digging it deeper into the catalog. And it's hard to find something else that's from that era that's like that. You can definitely tell what it's influenced, but it just feels like magic. It feels like this is the beginning of something special. And of course, we have the hindsight of knowing it was, but can only imagine what it was like to have seen him play music, back in that day. So yeah, I kept him at number 2 on my personal list because I thought we nailed that.
Nice. Yeah, I wish I had been, introduced to that stuff at such a young age like you were, and like I said, I think like very young growing up, my stuff was all just like Christian or like classical and piano music and stuff like that. But that's very cool that you got to experience him on the jukebox like that. I think that's a very cool thing. For me, my number two again is another very local tie, and this is a band that I would say this performer is probably the performer I've seen live the most in my days, and his name's Will Johnson, and he is the first band he was in, which was back in the late '90s. It was called Funland, and they played a place we talked about a lot, or we talked not a lot, but we mentioned in episode 1 called Mad Hatters. He was one of the bands that was a staple there. But then he went on to form a band in Denton called Centromatic, which is the band I've seen the most live in person. And he's done multiple things since then. Another band called South San Gabriel, which is also very good. He was in a project with, his name is David Bazan from Pedro the Lion. They did a project called the Undertow Orchestra. Some very cool stuff there as well. And today he's the drummer for Jason Isbell in the 400 unit. So he's gone on to land that gig, which is pretty cool because I'm also a big fan of the Isbell as well. But yeah, that guy just, I mean, just hugely impactful for me musically, just having just seen so many of his live performances and just has been a fan since, I was 18 or so.
So does that mean that I can claim that I've seen him? Because
Yeah.
I saw Isabel. Wow.
He
I
was
saw him
drummer.
without knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
My number one is, no surprise. He's the number one on our overall list as well. Mr. Willie Nelson. Just a hell of a career, man. Like he's just been a stellar songwriter, musician, actor. I mean, just everything. I don't want to misquote, but I think he was on Miami Vice at one point. So he's done just a little bit of everything. But yeah, Willie, I can remember listening to him when I was a kid and kind of talked about earlier about his Christmas album and just, singing and partnering with Waylon Jennings and Ray Charles and just, I mean, he's sang with just about every artist that's out there through the years and typically has hit songs to go with it. So just a storied career, man. And he would be my favorite from Texas for sure. And most impactful for me personally.
No surprise here for me either. Willie Nelson, my number one. George Strait might be King George, but Willie Nelson's like, he's forever, like forever president. Not up for re-election ever. If he ever, no one would ever run against him. But now he's just, I have a lot of local bias but this is a Texas bias. He embodies the state, embodies the music that this state can make, and more the larger than life personality when you think of someone from Texas, like everything that we have good or bad reputation for. I mean, but just we couldn't have a better ambassador for the brand that is Texas and everyone knows it. And I think he would be the last to like own it or admit it. He seems very, very humble, but I think that's why he's the perfect person for the job. But yeah, I think he'd come out number one on most everybody's list. That's why it was so easy for us to agree on him for the main list. But I will just throw out some other honorable mentions. Locally, John, you mentioned Tripping Daisy, Polyphonic Spree. They're both local honorable mentions that just didn't quite make it, but definitely meant a lot to me growing up and teenagers and 20s and today even still like to try to see them when I can. But yeah, that'll do it for my list. I'm sure I'll think of more people that I want to mention.
Yeah. So that's awesome. I think Willie does belong at the list, top of the list, I think, and that's why he's at the top of our collective list. For me, the only reason he's not, again, I think it's because I didn't get into the country music at a younger age. But the band that's number one on my list, they're a band from Katy, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston. I don't think I think they're one of the most criminally probably underrated bands out there, and just in general, definitely within the hard rock kind of metal category. And they're a band called King's X. Are either of you familiar with them?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So they late mid 80s is kind of when they got their start. Very much a progressive metal band, but they blended so many different other influences into their music, from soul to funk to blues. There's just a lot of elements that kind of combine to create this very, very unique sound. And their lead singer, Doug Pinnick, and bass player, amazing bass player, but also just amazing vocalist, just has this incredibly strong, just soulful voice that almost it's a little bit of a juxtaposition to the music, to the kind of metal sound that they create, but it just works and it just makes this very unique thing. Yeah, and they were one of those bands that, I found their CDs in my brother's room when rifling through his music, and, just resonated with me. And I think a lot of that had to do with there was a lot of in their music, a lot of religious undertones. They were going through a lot of, I think at the time that those albums I was listening to that came out early 90s, they were struggling with like their faith and like what did they believe, and like just wrestling with these very deep, religious issues, I guess. It's like they were had become Christians, and then they kind of got into the church, and I think kind of saw a lot of the hypocrisy that was there, and then were kind of turned off to it, but they still believed, they were still believers, but there was a lot of it that didn't, sit well with them, and you could get a lot of that from their lyrics. And to this day, that stuff still resonates with me, maybe even more so now as I'm older, and I've kind of gone through those same kind of dilemmas myself with my own faith. And so that's why it kind of sticks with me on more than just a musical level, But their music too was it was so cool and so unique that it's something that's I've just stuck with that band. And they put out a lot of stuff since then. Some of it not quite as good as some of the older stuff, but every now and then they put out a new album that I'm like, oh, this stuff's really, really good. Or at least like a handful of songs on there that, I really, really like. But there are two albums that I love the most, and they were the ones that I first got into: Faith, Hope, Love, and then their self-titled one, which is one after that. But a lot of people will mention Out of the Silent Planet and Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. Goes to Nebraska, I think it was their second album and kind of their breakthrough. They had a song called Over My Head that got some, pretty big radio play at the time back in the day. But anyway, that's it for my list. It's number one for me.
Yeah, that's actually a good call, because that's one of those bands that is I would call it a band's band. Like
Mm-hmm.
they've influenced a lot of bands over the years, and they've been around for a very long time. I didn't actually know that they were specifically from Katy. I've actually had breakfast in Katy a couple times, so I've been there. But
Oh, and real quick, I'd be remiss to not mention specifically their guitar player, who's awesome, amazing. I mean, Doug's awesome, the bass player,
yeah,
lead singer, like I mentioned, but their guitarist is one of my favorite all-time guitarists. His name's Ty Tabor. Just a brilliant guitarist, and I think, again, another one of those criminally underrated. But I think, like you're saying, what you're referencing right now, I think a lot of musicians recognize him as a
yeah,
really, really great guitar player that has influence.
yeah. That's good. You actually taught me something there. So this was tough, I know, guys, for all of us to put together just one top 10 list for the three of us, and then even our individual lists were, it was super challenging. And there's as you're bringing up honorable mentions, Coy and Graham, one that I remember used to play Athens, Georgia when I was in college all the time was Reverend Horton Heat.
Oh,
Another local one, right? We
yep.
haven't mentioned, and definitely probably could make a top 10 list as well. So there's tons of great music, and that's what I think, originally attracted us all to kind of focusing on kind of us talking about Texas music. There's so much to pull from. I mean, we've got a lot to talk about, obviously. So, that was a great exercise, a fun exercise, and probably not our last top 10. I'm sure we'll probably come up with some others down the road. So I guess we'll transition to, just like you guys gave me an assignment for this episode, I think it's time for some homework, guys. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an assignment. And one of my favorite things, I've mentioned this already, is blues music. And I think Mr. Jack White, which by the way, I kind of pissed off that I didn't get tickets to his show here in Dallas last week. So I really tried.
You're not alone there. I'm sure there was a lot of people upset they didn't.
Yeah, Trees is kind of a small venue, like 6 or
For
7.
Jack, it's very small.
Yeah.
It looked like a very cool show though. Guy from Michi, John Mudd, JT Mudd. He was there at that show, and I was watching his reels. It was fun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that Jack White has gone back and released a lot of blues music, not just from Texas, but all over the U.S., Chicago, and kind of the South. But he has released some Texas blues on vinyl, and so I don't know if the guy's got rights to it all, but man, I love going back and researching Texas blues. Man, I'm not talking about the Stevie Ray Vaughan blues. I'm talking about way back.
Sure.
And there's, dozens and dozens of artists out there that hailed from Texas that were, influential blues musicians. And one of them is a gentleman that went by the name of Lightning Hopkins. And I don't believe either one of you have really dove into his music in the past, but that's your assignment for our next episode, is to kind of dig into Lightning Hopkins and let me know what you think.
Yeah, I'm excited about checking them out, man.
Yeah.
I love discovering new stuff, and blues is definitely a category that I feel like I'm missing a lot there. So I'm excited to dive into that and kind of give you my take. I'm sure Coy is as well, so that'll be fun. It will, though, however, be on episode 4, because we have a special thing going on for episode 3, which is our interview with local singer-songwriter Jacob Furr. If you want to tease that, episode 3 will be once we get it completed, and we kind of have to put some big bookends on the interview, but excited about that. It was really fun to sit down with Jacob and talk to him and get his take on what he's doing in the local music scene as well. So excited about that. But for now, that's it from us. Yeah, we do need to mention, I think we talked about the beer, but we didn't mention exactly what we're drinking. So I do want to kind of plug Manhattan Project again and talk about Frost, which I've been drinking. It's hard to get that on the screen, but this is their winter IPA, which is pretty sure is a brand new one for them. Peacemaker. You got the blonde ale. Yeah, but this Frost is tasty, man. It's very good. It's got a very sprucey flavor, which is, I think, quite, it's the winter IPA, but I've been enjoying it quite a bit.
And I went with this because I almost always have this in the fridge. It's, we'd say their flagship beer, right? Half-Life. And it's their hazy IPA, and I like that they now have a quarter life. It's like a more easy drinking version of it.
110 calories.
And I think they have
I almost picked that up, actually.
And a double half-life if you're wanting to go a little stronger. But it's a great first thing I had from them probably, and just a great beer. But everything they have is great.
Yeah, they do real well with a lot of different styles as well. They're not just one thing, but
in a great location in Dallas with a great atmosphere, great food, great patio. I mean, we're kind of leaving patio weather now, but it depends on when you're listening to this. It could be patio weather.
I was thinking, Coy, if you have 2 half-lives, is it one whole life or?
No, no.
How does that work?
You just have 2 halves.
With that.
All right, guys. It's been fun. For now, we're going to sign out, and we just appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. We will say greatly, greatly appreciate it if you would do all the things that everybody urges you to do on these platforms, which is, like, subscribe, hit the bell, whatever it is on your particular platform that you're partaking. But anything you can do to kind of to stay in touch and in contact with us, we'd appreciate it. We'd also love to hear from you guys. We'd love to hear what your top 10 is. What's your personal top 10 Texas artists?
Yeah.
So comment and do all that thing, and we can have a conversation with you guys, because
tell us who we left off, like Nora Jones, for instance, who, after John mentioned duets with Willie Nelson, that is an awesome duet.
My wife, she brought Nora up last night as well. So that was probably an oversight for sure.
We'll do playlists as well. Spotify, YouTube. We'll put together playlists for you.
Yeah, we'll get a playlist up to kind of complement the episode, featuring artists we've talked about. So check that out as well. But appreciate you guys taking the time. Good night. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
See you later.